Talks between Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and American representatives Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner in Moscow continue. At the time of recording, it's 11:30 post-meridian in Kyiv and after midnight in Moscow. And now sources from the Kremlin are saying that Putin's negotiations with the American delegation may not end anytime soon. They might last until 4 o'clock, even though they've already been going on for 4 hours at the time of recording this video. Nevertheless, there are already some leaks about what they're discussing, and they're not encouraging. A peace agreement clearly isn't possible at this time. So in this episode, we'll quickly sum up the interim results of the negotiations to understand where all this is heading. We'll rely on insider information and existing statements. I'll also mention Volodymyr Zelensky's statement, as he's currently in Moscow for negotiations. He kind of fuels the information space by talking about what was actually discussed in Florida between the Ukrainian and American delegations. Confirmations of those insider reports we discussed earlier are now appearing. My name is Alexei Pechi. I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Please like this video and leave a comment. What is your opinion about these negotiations? It's very important for the promotion of this episode. And I also encourage you to support the work of this YouTube channel with any donation or by becoming a sponsor here on the YouTube platform. So check the description of this video. It says support the Alexei Pechi channel there. Pick any format that works for you. I will be grateful for any support from you. It's really valuable for the work of this YouTube channel. So, let me repeat once again, the negotiations between Putin, Witkoff and Kushner have been going on for the 4th hour now. Right now, it's already midnight midnight Moscow time and 11:30 Kyiv time. It should be noted that Witkoff has worked a bit on his mistakes after he was criticized for not using his own interpreter during the previous negotiations. And now, the interpreter is a graduate of the Moscow Pedagogical Institute, but since 2017 she has been working as an interpreter with the United States Department of State. What is also noteworthy is that in 2022, this interpreter signed a letter from the Translators Guild condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and now she is serving as the interpreter at these negotiations. And while the negotiations between Putin and Witkoff are ongoing, we are already getting some inside information, or rather leaks from these talks. This is a completely normal process. From my own experience working at the European Council, I can say that even while a meeting is still ongoing, those who are participating in it, they send their assistants and advisors to go out to the press and provide a certain amount of information, so that these are typical insider leaks to observe the information space's reaction. It's a normal process. So, National Broadcasting Company News, citing a well-informed Russian source, that's one of those assistants who came out and talked. They state that Vladimir Putin is not ready to make concessions on 3 key points of the peace plan allegedly proposed by the United States administration. According to him, Moscow will not compromise on the issues of Donbas territory, limiting the size of the Ukrainian armed forces, and international recognition of the seized Ukrainian territories. This is extremely terrifying and must never be allowed to happen. Jared Kushner and Stephen Witkoff took a peace plan draft approved by Kyiv to Moscow. Just before United States officials visited Russia, Ukrainian and American diplomats met in Florida. However, as American Broadcasting Company News reported citing sources, the parties were unable to make progress on the main territorial issue. Kyiv still rejects handing over Donbas to Moscow's control. Cable news network citing a high-ranking Ukrainian source notes that it also refused to agree to limit the size of its army to 600,000 troops and rejected demands to abandon joining NATO. On December 1, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy called the territorial issue the hardest. It should be noted that during the negotiations in Florida it was discussed for more than 6 hours. But it's just the question of territories. For his part, Vladimir Putin stated last week that the fighting will stop only when the Ukrainian army leaves what he called the occupied territories. He also stated that an agreement with the current leadership in Kyiv is legally impossible. Here is where key points arise, so take note. According to the leaked information, Putin is no longer insisting that Ukraine should never join NATO. So, there are 3 key issues. These are the territories, the size of the Ukrainian armed forces, and international recognition of the occupied territories. This is what I drew your attention to in previous episodes. At the end of last week, Putin stated that it would be more difficult to reach an agreement with Ukraine because the government there is illegitimate. Registration and a referendum are needed, that's clear. But then Putin stated that it is very important to him that at least the United States of America recognize the seized Ukrainian territories as Russian. Now he demands that the United States and Europe legally de jure recognize these as Russian territories. And Putin himself said with his own mouth why he needs this. Putin stated that legal recognition would mean that if Ukraine tries to take back these territories by force in the future, it would be considered an attack on Russia from an international perspective. That Ukraine is attacking Russia? If the war is simply frozen now and these territories are recognized only de facto but not de jure as Russian, then if Ukraine wants to reclaim these territories by military means at the international level, it will be reclaiming its legitimate territories that are under occupation. Putin himself said this, which is very important, and that's an interesting point. He's making a concession because of the NATO issue and needs to secure his position in the war, showing he's achieved something and secured these territories for Russia. But this sets a dangerous precedent. If such recognition occurs, who can guarantee he'll secure his position this way? He firmly secures his position and understands that along this line of contact, Ukraine definitely won't attack and won't go any further. All of this is fixed. After a few years, he can attack Ukraine again from these positions. But what's interesting is that Putin was practically trying to intimidate his counterparts today. Or rather, not even his counterparts, but Europe. Europe first and foremost. Here I will quote Vladimir Putin a few times, things he said before his meeting with Witkoff, and I'll also share some of Putin's statements when he answered journalists' questions after his speech at the forum called Russia Calling. At that time, by the way, Witkoff was waiting for him in the hallway. So, let me quote Putin about Europe's participation in the negotiations on Ukraine. Quote, Europeans are not staying silent. They claim they were excluded from negotiations, but I want to clarify that no one excluded them. They did it themselves. We were in close contact with them, but then they suddenly broke off contact with Russia on their own. Why did they do that? Because they adopted the idea of inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia. And apparently they still live with these illusions, even though they understand in their minds that this is long in the past, that it could never have happened. They took their wishes for reality at the time, but they can't admit it to themselves. They've removed themselves from this process. First, I'll stop here. Interesting that Putin calls this long past. So he understands that it was exactly in 2022, at the end of the year, when Russians were being driven out of Kyiv region, Kharkiv region, and Kherson region. At that time, there really was a chance to inflict a strategic defeat on the unwashed Russians. There was a chance. And Putin says, well, that time has already passed. Unfortunately, the same Europeans, the same Americans didn't push hard enough. I'll continue the quote. Second, observing that they also don't like the result today, they started interfering with the current United States administration and President Trump in achieving peace through negotiations. They refused peace talks and are interfering with President Trump. This is a typical effort to divide allies, suggesting, see Trump, it's not us, it's the Europeans causing problems for you. The story that Zelenskyy is to blame for everything didn't work, and neither did blaming Trump. For a while he went along with it, but then he stopped. I'll continue the quote. Putin says, third, they have no peace agenda. They're on the side of war. And even when they supposedly try to make some changes to Trump's proposal, we can see it clearly. All these changes are aimed at only one thing, to completely block the entire peace process, to put forward demands that are absolutely unacceptable for Russia. They understand this. And thus, to later blame Russia for shutting down this peace process. That's their goal. We see this clearly. Therefore, if they really want to return to the ground of reality, based on the situation that is developing on the ground, as they say in such cases, then by all means, we allow it. And in all this bravado, I personally believe subjectively that the Trump administration is to blame. The Trump administration gave Putin the courage to reason like this. The Trump administration allowed him to speak this way. That balding dictator, Putin, should have been cornered so deeply that all he could do was bark from there at most. He's bolder now. He speaks in the past tense, saying, we now talk to Americans as equals. That's it. And Putin understands that he might get away with this war, that he won't bear any responsibility for it. If Trump says not to give Ukraine the frozen Russian assets as reparations, but to profit or do business with them instead. Notice, no one is even talking about war crimes anymore, or about a tribunal against Putin and so on. And then, regarding the idea of scaring Putin, here's a quote. "We are not going to fight with Europe, I've already said this 100 times, but if Europe suddenly wants to fight us and starts, we are ready right now. There can be no doubt about this. The only question is, if Europe suddenly starts a war with us, I think that very quickly. Well, this is not Ukraine. With Ukraine, we are acting in a surgical way. Carefully, of course. Obviously, yes, this is not a war in the direct modern sense of the word. If Europe suddenly decides to start a war with us, then a situation could very quickly arise where we have no one left to negotiate with. Well, that just sounds ridiculous. Well, not for Russians. Russians, these, well, uneducated creatures, they worship Putin. Vladimir Vladimirovich, you are so right. Yes, we haven't even started yet. All of this, you see, all this bravado. And Putin says we're not at war with Ukraine. No, of course not. We're conducting the war carefully with surgical methods and so on. Complete nonsense. Well, listen, for Russians this is just perfect. He says that supposedly if it's with Europe, then it will be completely different. Well, that's nonsense. Let's be honest, the resources that Russia has lost in the war against Ukraine are enormous, both in terms of human losses and in terms of weaponry. To say that this is not a war but something neat or careful is complete nonsense. Today, as you know, Putin announced they captured Pokrovsk, Volkhansk, Mirnograd, Gulyai-Pol, Kupinsk, and others before that. All of this was aimed specifically at influencing the negotiations, to plant in the eyes of the American delegation the idea that, look, we are really winning, we don't care at all. We don't care about reaching an agreement. If it happens, fine. If not, we'll keep fighting since things are going well for us on the battlefield. This is the Kremlin's usual tactic. I'll discuss it in more detail in the next episode. That's it. So, these are just some interim results, as they say, go to bed already. I think by morning we'll find out something about what's going on. And even then, I assume that most likely it will just be limited to brief statements and that's it. There won't be any results for now. And I'll explain why. Because China is involved in this story, very much involved, and I think that the entire negotiation process, the real peace process, will develop along the axis of the United States, Europe, and China. I'll explain again in the next episodes why, so don't miss it, be sure to watch. I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions, write them in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's it for now, take care. Goodbye, everyone.